No. Belarus, sir. No. And Cameroon? No.
In view of the frenzy and the irrational manners that have been exhibited in this hall, the delegation of the Republic of China has now decided not to take part to any further proceedings of this General Assembly. Thank you, Mr. President.
Cameroon?
Yes.
Yes. Canada?
Wait.
The resolution is adopted. The government of People's Republic of China will be notified accordingly.
Now that the Assembly has taken a decision, that the question has been settled, let us not lose time and energy by falling into the temptation of judging attitudes which now belong to the past, of awakening suspicions which have already been overcome. Let us unanimously and resolutely engage on the new road which opens today before us. I solemnly appeal to all member states to leave no room for bitterness, but on the contrary, to abide by the decision of the General Assembly and endorse the tremendous step forward which has been taken last night.
The question of China thundered through the United Nations for 25 years. In June of 1945, while World War II still raged in the Far East, Communist and Nationalist Chinese were uneasily allied against the Japanese, and the United Nations was founded. China was admitted as one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, enjoying the right of veto, and the nationalist government took its seat. As the war ended, Japan was in control of most of Manchuria and Mongolia, all of Korea and Taiwan, and about a third of mainland China. The nationalists held about half of China, and the communists the rest. Repeated attempts were made by the United States and other nations to try to persuade the communist and nationalist authorities to work out some sort of coalition government, but they were all in vain. Full-scale civil war broke out by mid-1946, and by late 1949, the nationalist forces of Chiang Kai-shek were driven off the mainland to Taiwan, where the Generalissimo declared that his was the only legal government of China. At the same time, the People's Republic of China set up its government at the traditional capital of Peking. In the early days of November 1949, Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai of the People's Republic of China informed the United Nations that his government considered the presence of the existing nationalist Chinese delegation illegal and that it should be expelled. On January 13th, Ambassador Yakov Malik of the Soviet Union proposed that the Security Council not recognize the credentials of what he called the Kuomintang Group and exclude them. The proposal was rejected.
Here are the results of the voting. For the resolution 3, against 6, abstentions 2. Therefore, the Soviet draft resolution is not carried.
Representative of the Soviet Union. I, as representative of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in the Security Council, declare that the Soviet delegation will not participate in the work of the Security Council until the representative of the Kuomintang Group has been removed from the Security Council.
6 months later, on June 25, 1950, the United Nations Commission on Korea reported that North Korean forces had crossed the 38th parallel and invaded the South. The Security Council, with the Soviet delegation still absent, met immediately, and called on North Korea to cease hostilities and withdraw troops. But the North Korean army still rolled south. 2 days later, South Korea appealed to the UN for protection, and the Security Council called on all member states to help them repel the attack and to restore international peace and security. General Douglas MacArthur was designated Supreme Commander of the United Nations Force, an army of some 14 national contingents, the largest of which was the United States. All through the summer, the war went on, and by September, North Korea controlled all of South Korea, except for the Pusan perimeter in the southeastern corner of the country. Plans were in the works for a United Nations counterattack. That same September, when the 5th Annual General Assembly convened at Flushing Meadows, India formally proposed to that body for the first time that the People's Republic of China be admitted to membership.
It should be dealt with as early as possible, and a decision arrived at while the atmosphere of the Assembly is calm and the temperature not too high. Experience shows that the temperature is apt to rise with the progress of the session, and then a decision on the merits becomes very difficult.
There were to follow years of debate on this fevered matter. Debate in which, despite later differences between Peking and Moscow, the Soviet Union consistently backed admission of the People's Republic of China to the United Nations.
I represent the only legal government in China. I wish to urge upon this assembly, first, that it should vote upon this resolution at once, and secondly, that it should vote the resolution down. Document A/1 370, the next Soviet Socialist Republic's proposal. The General Assembly decides to invite the representatives of the People's Republic of China, accredited by the Central People's Government, to take part in the work of the General Assembly and its organs. All in favor, please raise their hand. 11 in favor, 37 against, 8 abstentions. The proposal is defeated.
In mid-September, MacArthur's forces landed at Incheon and drove north of the 38th parallel. By mid-November, the North Koreans were all but defeated, with only a few isolated pockets of resistance along the northern border with China.
Oh, the war in Korea had a tremendous impact upon China and upon the Chinese people, because the Chinese people and the Chinese government were fearful that the United States was invading China, and that was not a mythical fear by any means. Remember that the Japanese invaded China from Korea through Manchuria into the main part of old China proper. And when the head of the United Nations forces, the commander of the United Nations forces, General MacArthur, stormed over the 38th parallel, dividing South and North Korea, he was not satisfied to merely occupy the whole of South Korea.
Chester Ronning is a retired Canadian diplomat and just about the epitome of the old China hand. Born in the country, schooled in the country, worked in the country as an educator and diplomat. Ambassador Ronning was serving in the People's Republic of China as Canadian charge d'affaires in Nanking at the time that General MacArthur moved to the Chinese border.
He stormed across the 38th parallel in order not only to wipe out the military power of the North Koreans in punishment for their invasion of South Korea, but he stormed right to the border of China, the Manchurian border of China. No responsible government in China concerned about the security of China could have done anything else than the Chinese did when they came across the Yalu River. Because remember that all of the power stations developing power from the Yalu River were on the Korean side of the Yalu River. and the embryo industry that China had in Manchuria depended completely upon power from the power stations on the Korean side.
The Chinese communists have imposed a grave danger upon the world. The danger that the present conflict may not be limited to the Korean area. The United Nations has done its best to avert this peril. The United States, on its own behalf, and in the exercise of the responsibilities of the Unified Command, has made every effort to do the same. We have sought publicly to reassure the Chinese Communist regime that neither the United States nor the forces of the United Nations operating in Korea represent any threat to the territorial integrity or security of the legitimate interests of states which border on the frontier of Korea.
The United Nations forces were thrown back to the 38th parallel in bitter winter fighting. In the meantime, the United States had placed a quarantine on Taiwan, interposing its 7th Fleet between the island and mainland China. The United Nations next attempted a diplomatic solution, and for the first time, a representative of the People's Republic of China came to attend its deliberations in New York.
On item 2, in conformity with the decision of the Council, I invite the representatives of the Central People's Government of the People's Republic of China to take their seat at the Council's table.
On the instructions of the Central People's Government of the People's Republic of China, I am here, in the name of the 475 million people of China, to accuse the United States government of the unlawful and criminal act of armed aggression against the territory of China, Taiwan.
General Wu then protested to the United Nations for allowing, as he put it, the so-called delegate of the Chinese Kuomintang reactionary remnant clique to sit unashamedly here and arrogate to himself the rights of the people of China. Historically, he declared, Taiwan was an inseparable and integral part of China, and the presence of United States troops, the 7th Fleet and the 13th Air Force, in and around Taiwan, constituted armed invasion of Taiwan. Therefore, it was an act of open, direct, armed aggression against China itself. He charged that the United States government had thrown down the gauntlet of war before the Chinese people, and that it was part of the overall plan of the United States government to intensify its aggression, control, and enslavement of the Asian peoples of Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, and other countries. He then quoted Tanaka, calling him one of the master planners of Japanese aggression. Tanaka said, to conquer Asia, one must first conquer China. To conquer China, one must first conquer Manchuria and Mongolia. To conquer Manchuria and Mongolia, one must first conquer Korea and Taiwan.
Our actions since the establishment of the Peking regime have not been aggressive toward China or toward Korea or in Korea. During the year preceding the attack from North Korea, the United States took no action in Asia which could possibly be interpreted as aggressive.
I charge the Chinese Communist regime with criminal, willful, wanton, unprovoked aggression upon the Republic of Korea. I charge it with endangering the peace of the world. I charge it with inviting the cataclysmic disaster to all mankind by its insane, immoral, and monstrous conduct.
The Charter of the United Nations provides the Republic of China a permanent seat in this council. That seat is given to a free and independent Chinese government representing a free and independent Chinese people. That seat was not given to a puppet regime in China to serve the aggressive purposes of its master.
I wish to remind the Security Council once again that this Kuomintang reactionary representative in front of me, disowned and denounced by the Chinese people, has no right whatsoever to represent China. I have serious doubts whether this man who speaks before me is a Chinese himself. The 475 million great people of China speak a language which it appears he does not know.
All the members of the Security Council are in favor of this draft resolution. Please raise their hands.
Two very different resolutions. One condemning the People's Republic of China for invasion of the Republic of Korea. The second condemning the United States for aggression against the People's Republic of China. Were both defeated in the Security Council.
Le résultat est une voix en faveur, 9 contre, pas d'abstention, un membre n'a pas pris part au vote. La résolution est rejetée.
General Wu's delegation returned to Peking. The nationalists remained in China's seat at the UN. And the fighting in Korea seesawed back and forth across the 38th parallel until a temporary truce was reached in 1953. In the meantime, another war had been going on in Asia, in Indochina, and 19 nations gathered in Geneva in 1954 to try to seek permanent solutions to both conflicts, an agreement on guarantees for future peace in all of Asia. And though the conference convened in the Palais des Nations, once the headquarters of League of Nations, and now the UN's European headquarters, it was not held under UN auspices, nor was there UN participation. Peking was not a member, and indeed believed that the United Nations, by its resolution, had become a combatant in the Korean War. The Geneva Conference was successful in securing an armistice for Indochina, but got nowhere in converting the Korean armistice into a peace. Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai of the People's Republic of China would not agree to UN-supervised elections to reunite all of Korea. Chester Ronning represented Canada at Geneva.
We came there with high hopes of a peace treaty being signed at the end of that conference, or at least of a settlement being made, a peaceful settlement being made to prevent the renewal of hostilities. We felt sure that after the armistice there would be a peace settlement. But very early in the conference, we learned that there would be no solution of the problem. There would be no peace settlement. Fortunately, there's been no renewal of hostilities in Korea, and the armistice is still holding. But as I have said before many times, if the United Nations had been represented in that conference, I am certain that we could have had a settlement.
The only official contact between the United Nations and the People's Republic of China since the appearance of General Wu at Lake Success in 1950 came in Peking in January 1955. Dag Hammarskjöld journeyed to China for a face-to-face meeting with Premier Zhou Enlai to try to obtain the release of certain prisoners of war still held captive nearly 2 years after the Korean armistice.
My visit to Peking was the first stage in my efforts to achieve the release of the 11 flyers and other United Nations command personnel still detained. I feel that my talks with Mr. Zhou Enlai were definitely useful for this purpose. We hope to be able to continue our contact. The door that has been opened can be kept open, given restraint on all sides.
A month later, in February 1955, the intermittent violence between the offshore islands of Quemoy, Matsu, and the Pescadores and the mainland led to a second invitation to the People's Republic of China to send a representative to the Security Council. This time, Peking rejected the call, claiming that any action the UN might propose would be illegal, so long as the nationalists sat in China's chair.
My government deeply regrets the negative attitude of the Central People's Government to the invitation extended by the Security Council. At the same time, Mr. Zhou Enlai's reply has underscored the danger that if the present hostilities are not brought to an end, they may spread into a wider conflagration.
In 1964, the Chinese exploded their first nuclear device. By coincidence, it was the first year that there had been no vote on the Chinese question since India first proposed the admission of mainland China in 1950. There were no votes on anything that year because of a financial crisis. The votes from 1951 to 1960 were on the United States motions to keep the Chinese question off the agenda. In 1961, the Assembly voted to declare China's chair to be an important question, requiring a two-thirds majority for passage. The Assembly also allowed its inclusion on the agenda for the first time. 1 year after the Chinese nuclear test, in 1965, as the General Assembly was to address itself to the Chinese question once more, the Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom took note of an important anniversary.
The United Nations is 20 years old. And if we set that 20 years in the perspective of recorded history, we cannot suppose that the United Nations has yet reached its full stature.
In 20 years, the United Nations had more than doubled its membership, from 51 in 1945 to 117 in 1965. Nearly all the new members were new nations as well, independent and independent-minded. And as the numbers increased, the United States found it increasingly difficult to keep Taiwan in and Peking out.
Mr. President, the United States will vote against the resolution to expel one of our members in order to make room for the regime in Taiping. No delegation in this debate has been able to refute what is in fact undeniable.
That both in words and in deeds, Communist China rejects the commitment required of member states to settle their disputes by peaceful means and to abandon the use or threat of force in international relations.
Les résultats du vote est les suivants. Pour 47, contre 47, abstention 20. La proposition n'est pas adoptée.
From 1966 through 1968, the United States was able to muster a majority, and the Peking government stayed out of the United Nations.
United Republic of Tanzania? Yes.
In 1969, on the eve of another vote on China, Secretary General U Thant spoke of his concern at the continued isolation of 1/4 of the world's population.
Some time ago, in response to questions, I stated through a UN spokesman that for some years to come, the nature of relationship between mainland China and the two superpowers will dominate the international political scene. I still hold this opinion. In my view, the present impasse in the relationship between China and the rest of the world is a tragedy.
Singapore.
Abstention.
Abstention.
In 1969, the majority still favored the United States position. But in the 25th General Assembly in 1970, the tide finally began to turn. 51 members voted to seat the People's Republic of China. 49 voted against. For the first time, Peking had a majority, but not yet a two-thirds majority. China would have to wait another year. In midsummer 1971, the United States announced a major change in its official China policy, a complete reversal of its 21-year-old attitude towards the People's Republic of China.
Until recently, the People's Republic of China has strongly opposed the United Nations, has been extremely critical of the United Nations. Now, in the last 9 months or year, their attitude toward the United Nations has changed. And we think that they are now interested in becoming members of the United Nations. Secondly, their attitude toward other governments has changed markedly. They have established diplomatic relations with several other governments. Certainly their relations with the United States have improved. And all of these things together lead us to the conclusion that it is wise in the United Nations to have them represented.
I now give the floor to the chairman of the delegation of the People's Republic of China, His Excellency Mr. Chiao Kuan-hua.
And after the vote of the 26th General Assembly, which gave China's chair to the People's Republic of China, her voice as an official member state was finally heard in the United Nations on Monday, November 15, 1971.
主席先生，各位代表先生，首先，请允许我以中华
I strongly believe that the presence amongst us of the People's Republic of China, which is now to become a reality, attests to the considerable improvement in the international situation and will eventually lead to the strengthening and betterment of this organization. I have always said that room should be made in the United Nations for member governments with widely differing economic and social systems. Now, at the close of this debate, it seems that the organization will fulfill more fully one of the basic purposes of the Charter, that is, to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations.
The meeting is adjourned.